Hello friends. So in this lecture we are going to see how to set up our Spring Boot application. So before that, let me just quickly see where we were in the last lecture. Okay, so I have my Angular IDE open here, and I'm just opening a terminal window where I can execute my Angular commands. So I want to just run the application and quickly take a look at the browser, the current state of our Angular application. Okay, so we are here, and then we'll run our application ngserve. It is going to launch our application, and then we'll open this in the web browser. So a quick recap by the time it brings it up. So we had created a login screen, and we have this login component here. For that, this is the HTML. It takes user name and password. Okay, so this is the code for that. It takes username and password in the form, and then this is the corresponding logic here. So when the user enters on the submit, this on submit method executes. We have put a on submit of the form. We are calling this method here. Okay, on submit. So this method will be executed, and we are creating a login payload from the values entered in the form, username and password. Domain is hard coded here, and then we are calling this auth service. We created a auth service also. This service will basically make the Spring Boot REST service calls. Okay, we don't want to put everything in this one component. We want to keep the services separately. So that's why we have created this auth service. There's a login method, and we are passing this login payload in that, and then it returns a observable object. Okay, so that can be worked upon asynchronously. So we are subscribing to that, and if the in the response, if we see a status of 200, which means everything was fine, user got authenticated on the server, so we are routing the user to the home page. If there is any problem, not 200 but some other response from the server, it means that the user was not authenticated successfully, and the response will have some error message or something. So that will be in the data.message. Whatever response comes back, in that we'll have the message attribute. We are showing it in the error message, and this error message is being used on the HTML, right? So if error message has some value, then we are showing that. And this portion, if there is some problem, we're not even able to make the call to the REST service. Maybe the service endpoint URL is wrong or something. Then we'll show some message that the server was not accessible. Okay, so that's what is happening here. And then in this auth service, here we are just making a HTTP post request. We are sending this login data back to the server for the authentication. So it's a post request. This is the HTTP. This is the URL for that REST endpoint. We haven't created yet in the Spring Boot, but that's what the purpose of this session is. So we are going to create a Spring Boot service for this service endpoint URL so that it can be accessed. So currently, if we try to access login page, when we enter some data and when we click on submit, the call will come at this place, and here it will fail because this is not ready yet. Okay, so that's what we are going to do in this session. So let's go to the browser here, and we'll try to access our application. It is okay, and if we go to the login, and I just put something here, let's say test, and when we enter, so obviously because there is no server, so we will try to hit the server, and at this point, which I just explained, At this point, when it comes here, it tries to make the call to the server. It's not available there, so that's why. And in this case, we are showing a message: server could not be accessed. Try again. So let's try to set up the server side for this application. So now, for some time, we'll now we are going to focus on the Spring Boot side. Okay, and then once we have created the Spring Boot application, and we will create a service there for the authentication, and then we'll come back to this Angular application and we'll try to make the call again and see what happens. Okay, so for the Spring Boot application, I'll start it from zero. So let me go to there are multiple ways of creating the skeleton application or the project. So you can use Maven archetype, or like you can use some existing pom.xml, or this is a quick way of using start Spring IO. If you go here and you can select what you need for your application, and then this will give you a project skeleton that you can start working on. Okay, it's going to be a Maven project that I want. Somebody, if they are comfortable with Gradle, you can use that as well. One of these. I want it for Java, and Spring Boot version you can choose, and here you can specify project meta. So what group here, and an artifact and name. So I want pom.dev cloud group, and artifact is, let's call it user service. Okay, and so we can just call it a demo project for Spring Boot. And you can choose what you want as the like packaging. So I want jar, so you can use Spring Boot jar for the web application also. You can simply run that. And Java version, I want to choose Java 8. Okay, and that's also after this. Let's choose some dependencies here. Okay, add dependencies. So what you want here? So I want web to start with, Spring Web, so that will give you those libraries which are required for that. And what else? I'll use Lombok also, so it will help us to create our Pojo classes quickly. We don't need to provide getter setters and constructors, all these things. And I want to keep it very simple in the beginning, right? So that's why I'm not choosing other things. We'll come later, like, or maybe later we'll add more dependencies for as we need them, right? So for databases, okay, and JMS or anything else that we need, Spring Security, that also will add at some point. But to start with, I want to keep it very simple. Okay, so then I'm just using uh, these two for now, and let's create our project. Okay, so click on generate, and it will generate a skeleton project, user service.zip. If we go here and copy it, okay, we copied it, and I'm going to our project. We are doing it here, full stack project. That's our location. This is the Angular, and here we are doing the Angular project. Here I want to keep my Java. I'll put it here, and then I'm going to extract it. Okay, so I can delete this now. This is user service, and this is our project, Java project root. We have got the pom.xml here. Okay, so now we want to import this in Eclipse. I will use Eclipse as IDE for my Spring Boot Java project. So I'm going to use Eclipse. I have already opened one instance and this black screen, right? So this is for my existing project, like I said. So whenever you see this black screen, so that means that I'm using my reference project to copy some code, right? So for this project, I'm going to launch a new instance of the Eclipse. Okay, so I'm going to launch Eclipse again. So here I can choose a different workspace now, and I have so here where we are doing this project, full stack project, we have got this Eclipse workspace for the full stack project here. So this one I want to use for my Eclipse for my Java project, so I'll use this one. Okay, and so then once we go to this Eclipse, we are going to import our project. So our project was here, Java. This is the project we have created. Okay, pom.xml, this is the location. So here I'm going to copy this path and I'll import this project in my Eclipse. Okay, so I go to the import. Sorry, I want to import this Maven project. So import, and then I'll go to the Maven, existing Maven projects. And here I'll specify that directory and this if there are pom.xml one or if whatever, right? So if there are more sub projects, then you will see all those locations, right? So pom.xml, you need this one and finish. I'm just going to import that project here. And also on this Spring Initializer website, here when we created this project, we also specified the Spring Web. So when we specify Spring Web, by default, it uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container. So we don't need a separate uh, container, web container, right? So it's already with that. So that's good for our website. We can host like anything. If you want to host our like we can host our services here, REST services obviously. But if you want to host our whole Angular application, we can also embed that in this Spring Boot application itself. Okay, so let me see what's happening here. So user service, this project we have got here, and com. Then here this is the source main Java com dev cloud group user service source main Java. Okay, because depending upon what information we provided on the Spring Initializer website, we got this created here. And you see this user service application. This is our entry point. Okay, for this Spring Boot application. Okay, and then there's nothing else. It's all just the skeleton. You can put your resources here. If anything you put here in the static, that can be loaded. You can access from the web, like web browser. And this is application or properties where you specify your configuration for Spring Boot. And then we have test. Here you can write your testing like unit. Okay, so that's all. We have this pom.xml here. You can see what we have here. So I think we only specified the Spring Boot starter for the web application. So it's a Spring framework, Spring Boot starter, and const dev cloud group is that the group ID which we specified. User service, and then here dependencies. You can see that so far we have very limited, just the Spring Boot starter web, because we wanted to have the Apache Tomcat and those the web specific libraries, and then project Lombok, so that we when we write our Pojo classes we don't have to specify meta setters, constructor, all those things. And then this test comes with that, and that's it. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is that I want to specify a few things here in the application.properties. So I'll go here and I have specified few things. So for the HTTP server where my Tomcat should run, I can specify it here. So I'm telling server port 80. I want to run it on port 80 and host is localhost. Okay. When I'll go to the production, then I'll specify whatever server it is going to run. And then I'm specifying a context path also, user service, so that if there are multiple applications running on port 80, uh, for our application, we can differentiate them with this users like context path. Very similar to what we had in the Angular, right? We introduced this user service as the base URL. Similarly, on the Spring Boot side or the Java application side, also I want to specify a context. So this is this user service for this one. So all the URLs, when we try to access them, they will have like, so it will become localhost port 80 and user service. That becomes our something like this. Right here. So for our server, it will become HTTP localhost port we specified 80, and then we also specified this user service as the context path like this. So this becomes our base URL. And then if you want to expose a service for the authentication, right? So I'll come to that, how to create a REST service, but we'll specify a path for that. So we'll, as here, right, token, generate token we want. So we'll specify something like the path will be like this in that service, right? So when we create our authentication service, we'll have to create a path like this there, so that then after that we will be able to access that service using this endpoint URL. Okay, we'll come to that. So before that, let me quickly launch the application. So I think everything is all set here. Okay, I'll just launch the application. I'll go here and you can just run as Java application, or you can debug. So usually I do a debug as Java application, so that if I need to debug something, I can do that as well. Okay, so it's all doing all the setup. It's downloading any uh, dependencies that are required for this to our local Maven repository. And then it will start the application. It will start the Tomcat, and it will start the Tomcat on port specified here, which is 80. Okay, so you can see our Tomcat has been started on port 80 here. Okay, now We'll write a quick REST service for our testing. Right? So I'm going to create a quick REST service just for the testing. So I'll go here and I'll create a new package, user service, and in controller. Here I want to put all my REST service. Okay, and here I will create a new class. Let's call it our test service. Okay, and I want to make it a REST service. So I'll put an annotation here, REST controller, and then I want to write a method here, public. I want to return some string test. I'll just return from here success. Okay, so this becomes our REST service. And how you want to access this? This is our REST service class, but I want to make a HTTP GET request, so I can mark it as a GET mapping, and then you can provide here the path for that. And I want to say just test. Okay, and then that's it. Save this. So like I explained already, so what would be the full service endpoint URL for this method? It will be the base URL plus whatever we put here, right? So our base URL was, go here, so until here, this is our base URL. Okay, because if you see here in the application.properties, you have this localhost 80, and this is a context path. So HTTP localhost :80 and user service. This becomes our base URL, and then within that, this is our test service for the rest. So just this thing, just test. You can put here test. That's it. So that becomes the service endpoint URL for this REST service and for this particular method. Okay, now I'll stop this application and start it again in debug mode. And this is our test service. I'm going to put a debug point here, and then I'll try to access this REST service. It's a GET request. It's a Tomcat started already, so now we can access it. So I can directly go to the web browser and try to access it from here. So localhost 80 service, user service, and test. And if you enter it, you can see here our debugger has started. You can see this method has been hit. Okay, so which means that our test service for the REST is working good. I'll start and resume it, and then you can go back to the web browser and you can see the result has been successfully returned. Okay, so which means that our Spring Boot application has been successfully set up, and we were able to test one REST service as well. Okay, so I think that's the end of this session. We set up a Spring Boot application and we tested one REST service. In the next lecture, we are going to create a REST service for our authentication, for the user authentication, and then we'll make that accessible. We'll access that from our Angular application. Okay, so thanks for joining this lecture, guys, and see you shortly.